Amy Castle will moderate today's program, which is focused on fighting the anti-abortion Kansas constitutional amendment. Amy is a leader in ACLU, serving on the Kansas board and as a faculty advisor for KU at ACLU. She serves on our Douglas County Dems Executive Committee and Council. She is an award-winning professor, an exemplary mentor to students, and a dynamic activist. Amy has put together a great panel for us, so let's get started. One program note, and I'm turning it over to Amy and the group up here. We have been passing out little index cards. If you have a question, when we get towards the end of the panel, we'll start picking up. If you could just wave your card if you have a question written down, and we will do that in the question and answer period, okay? And if you want a card, raise your hand now. Great. Amy, you're on.
All right, good morning. Can everyone hear me? All right, it is a pleasure to be here. Welcome to our panel discussion today. We will be talking about the upcoming proposed constitutional amendment that would ban abortions in Kansas. We have a terrific panel whom I will introduce shortly, but first let's talk about how we got here. And Ian, could you do the PowerPoint slide for me, please? There we go. I don't have a clicker, so I'm going to be asking Ian when I need to change the PowerPoint. So let's talk about how we got here and why this moment in the form of this anti-abortion amendment is so important. Ian? 3 years ago, the Kansas Supreme Court held that our state constitution protects the right to access abortion in Kansas. That decision, Hodes and Nassar versus Derek Schmidt. I will refer to that as a Hodes decision. Hodes was a well-reasoned and thoughtful judicial opinion that protects every Kansan's right to choose their reproductive destiny. Every Kansan, including women, trans men, and non-binary folks. You see, the Hodes court and the lawyers making the legal arguments were quite brilliant, which really made those on the right angry. The Hodes court anticipated that the Supreme Court might overturn Roe versus Wade, which is where we get our federally protected constitutional right to abortion access. So the brilliance of the Hodes opinion was tying the constitutional right to abortion access to our Kansas state constitution rather than our United States federal constitution. And as anyone who's paying attention knows, the Supreme Court is, in fact, likely going to overturn Roe versus Wade this summer in the Dobbs case that is pending before the Supreme Court. But in Kansas, because of the Hodes opinion, we Kansans have a constitutional right to abortion access. Ian? Literally, the very next day after the Kansas Supreme Court issued the Hodes opinion, some Republican legislators posted on social media expressing outrage over the opinion and calling for a constitutional amendment that would ban abortions in Kansas in all circumstances. 3 years later, here we are facing this proposed state constitutional amendment that would allow the legislature to ban abortions in Kansas in all circumstances. As we'll learn, the language of the proposed amendment is by design confusing, and the anti-abortion amendment proponents, they have some really strong messaging that we are going to have to counter. Ian? But don't despair, because we have some help here today in the form of our panelists who will be providing their expertise on how we can defeat this anti-abortion amendment. So I'll introduce our panelists. I'll start with Rachel Sweet. Yes. Rachel is the campaign manager for Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, a coalition of reproductive rights advocates and allied organizations working to defeat the anti-abortion amendment. Previously, Rachel served as the Director of Public Policy and Organizing for Planned Parenthood Great Plains, where she oversaw the organization's lobbying, electoral, and grassroots efforts in Kansas and western Missouri. Rachel lives in Kansas City and has been involved in progressive politics on both sides of the state line for nearly a decade. Thank you for being here, Rachel. Next is Melinda Lavonne. Melinda is another rock star. Melinda is a mother of four and a midwife who lives in Lawrence and a longtime Democrat. In the last 2 years, Melinda has worked 6 campaigns for local Democrats, and this year Melinda is dedicated to stopping the anti-abortion amendment. Melinda is currently serving as the KDP General Committee on the 2nd CD Committee as the membership chair for Lawrence DSA and is the chair of Vote No Kansas, a new political action committee Melinda recently founded, which is focused on defeating this anti-abortion amendment. And then finally, Alina Matakowski. Yay! Alina is a sophomore at KU majoring in strategic communications and political science. Alina grew up in Lawrence, where she attended Free State High School and became best friends with my daughter, Sabrina. At KU, in addition to her studies, Alina volunteers at the Dole Institute of Politics, where she sits on the student advisory board, and she currently coaches the Lawrence High debate team. Alina is passionate about defeating this amendment, and her passion is infectious. It was, I think last December, you were at my house visiting Sabrina, and I told Alina, I said, did you know this amendment's coming up? And she was like, what? They're gonna try and ban abortions? And literally, Alina tried to start a social media campaign that day. And I think you've learned a little bit since then, so we'll hear from Alina on her efforts on her social media campaign. Ian? So, Rachel, let's start with you. And you can just tell Ian when you want to flip the slides. But what I would like for you to do is tell us a bit more about the proposed anti-abortion amendment, what it actually says, who's behind it, and what your organization is doing to fight this amendment.
Absolutely, I'm happy to. Light. Can you guys hear me? No? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Just
Okay. Okay. I'll speak very closely to the mic. Does that sound okay? Okay, fantastic. Hi, everyone. Amii, thank you so much for having us all here today. As Amii said, I am managing the campaign that we are calling Kansans for Constitutional Freedom. And we are the coalition that is working hard to defeat the anti-choice constitutional amendment that will be on every Kansans August 2nd primary ballot. So I'm here to talk a little bit more about what is this thing. We've been doing, a lot of research, polling, focus groups, and one of the biggest things we're noticing is when people read this thing, they have absolutely no idea what it's talking about. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what the substance of this proposal is and the impact that it would have on Kansans. So I'll take my next slide. I think Amii covered most of this, but in 2019, the Kansas Supreme Court found that the Kansas Constitution guarantees the right to personal autonomy, which is a very broad right that also includes the right to have an abortion, make decisions about pregnancy, health care, family life, and there was immediate organizing and movement from the anti-choice movement, from their conservative allies to start the work of issuing this constitutional amendment, moving it through our state legislature. And in 2020, they were unsuccessful in getting the votes that they needed to get this thing on the ballot. But after the 2020 elections, we know that while the top of ticket was really great for Democrats, state legislative races, including those here in Kansas, did not necessarily go the way that we wanted. So when we came back in 2021 for the legislative session, we had a very different legislature than we did in 2020. So in the 2021 session, the constitutional amendment received the necessary 2/3 supermajority votes in both our state House and our state Senate, and it will be on your ballot on August 2nd. I will take the next slide. All right, so what does this thing say? I won't read it aloud to you because that is, you guys can read. But I think when folks read this, there's obviously a lot of emotionally charged language, right? It starts out because Kansans value both women and children, as if to suggest that if you vote against this amendment, you somehow, as a Kansan, do not. I think the thing that we need to pull out of here, like the real nugget of this information, is that the state of Kansas, the Kansas Constitution would not create or secure a right to abortion, right? There would be no Kansas constitutional right to abortion if this amendment is passed. And I know that Amii did a lot of great table setting here, but we are at serious risk in this country at this moment of Roe v. Wade being overturned. There's going to be a U.S. Supreme Court case. We're expecting a decision in June of this year in a case called Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health that definitely has the potential to overturn Roe or to really erode it beyond recognition. And as we all know, Roe is technically still the law of the land, but in Texas, there has been a 6-week abortion ban in effect since September 1st of 2021. So for many people in this country already, Roe is a right in name only. And in Kansas, we have the opportunity to choose a different path and to say that our state constitution and the people of our state respect the right and the conscience of each individual to make their own personal health care decisions. So this is a critical vote that is happening at a very critical moment in history. And I'll go ahead and take the next slide. So who's behind this amendment? You know, why are we doing this now? Who is running point on this? Who is pushing for this type of policy? So the most important thing is that for a lot of the legislators in Topeka, present company excluded, of course, this is an amendment that is about personal political ambition. I lobbied for Planned Parenthood for 4 years in the Kansas Capitol, and you would be surprised. There are, of course, folks that have sincere moral opposition to abortion. That they're allowed to feel that way. You know, our position was always, you are entitled to your views, but you do not get to legislate them on the rest of the state. And there are, of course, always those true believers, but there are a lot more people that are more than willing to go along to get along and will vote for anti-abortion policies and policies that harm Kansans because it's the most politically expedient and easy thing to do. So I think there's obviously a reason that this is on a primary ballot and not a general election, besides the fact that the supporters of this amendment clearly understand that their chances are better in a primary, right? This is an unpopular policy. But it's also about, you know, anti-choice candidates that are running for office that want to use this to boost turnout. It is about electing more conservative Republicans in a Republican primary election. And I think it's really important we don't lose sight of the fact that, you know, for many people that went and, you know, supported putting this thing on the ballot, it's really about what is most politically easy for them to do. And it's, of course, always about, you know, the same individuals, you know, the same politicians want to distract us from the other issues that are going on. They use abortion as a political wedge issue. That's not going to change. But also, this is an opportunity for all of us to say that we're not going to let you do that. We are going to stand up for our fellow Kansans and oppose this thing in August. And it's also really important to know, you know, who wrote this proposal, who's funding the campaign to get it passed. And that is largely 3 organizations. It is Kansans for Life, the Kansas Catholic Conference, and the Family Policy Alliance. So these are 3 really strong conservative interest groups. If you look at the campaign finance reports from the Value Them Both campaign, we see that this proposal is, like, the campaign to get this passed is largely funded by 3 mega donors. So it's Kansans for Life, the Archdiocese of Kansas City, Kansas, and the Catholic Diocese of Wichita. And I have heard from a lot of Catholics in this state that are super disappointed that their church, you know, the churches that they tithe to, that they give to, are using their resources in this way. I'm sure there are a lot of Catholics that are vehemently, you know, opposed to abortion, but there are also a lot of Catholics in this state that are not thrilled with the things that they're hearing from the pulpit on Sundays, and the way that, you know, the 2 largest dioceses in the state gave the Value Them Both campaign $750,000. So it's a lot of money, and I just think it's important we remember, you know, who is supporting this and where the money is coming from, and perhaps what that money could be better used for. But I will get off that soapbox. So who is KCF? Sorry, I'll take the next slide. So there are obviously a lot of organizations in the state that are working hard to make sure that this constitutional amendment is rejected in August. The 4 organizations on the screen, Planned Parenthood Great Plains Votes, URGE, Trust Women, and the ACLU of Kansas, are the executive committee of an organization that we're calling Kansans for Constitutional Freedom. One thing that we have been working hard on is expanding our coalition. So we have established a steering committee that has over 25 grassroots organizations across the state and is continuing to grow, that are going to support the campaign through social media, through canvassing, door knocking, through field programs, and through just general education of their supporters and constituents. But I'll take the next slide, sorry. But yeah, those are generally the core organizations that are involved. And we thought it was really important to come together to make sure that we are spending resources efficiently, to make sure that we are very coordinated in all of the things that we are going to do to defeat this amendment. And I will say that, we are running a really professional operation. So one of the things that we're, prioritizing most is research. And, when you do research and polling for a ballot measure like this, it's not necessarily your typical horse race type poll, right, that you would do for a candidate campaign. Who's pulling ahead? What is the, we obviously do that. We're going to do that throughout the cycle from now until August. But really, this is about finding effective messaging that can resonate with both swing voters and with our base voters. So, one of the things that we've been thinking about as we build this campaign is that, this is on the August ballot because the supporters of this amendment are counting on low turnout, right? They want to push this thing through in an election where, 25 to 27% of Kansans show up. So base mobilization is going to be a huge part of this effort, but we also know that there are people that are, Democrats, moderate Republicans, independent voters that do show up to these elections anyway and are with us on the issue. So we are approaching it from both angles, and we need to find messaging, which we'll talk about later, that really can cut across the different groups of voters in the state of Kansas and lead us to a victory. Obviously, abortion can be a really tricky subject matter to talk about. It's hard for a lot of people. It is, a sensitive topic, but there are ways that we can talk about this issue with voters that invoke empathy and understanding, and that will help us get to our win number, and that will help us protect these rights, hopefully for years to come. We're also fundraising. Because this is streamed, I will not tell you what our budget is because I'm sure that there's someone from our opposition campaign watching at home or in this room, but which is fine. We have people that do that too. It's all good. But we are raising millions of dollars. This is going to be a very well-funded, well-resourced campaign. I know that none of us like talking about that because we're good Midwesterners and we think, we also think there shouldn't be gross amounts of money in politics, but we have to spend a lot of money to defeat this thing. And luckily, we have not just a base of really solid donors in the state of Kansas helping us out, but we do have national organizations that understand that this is a very important ballot measure and that this is winnable. A lot of times these DC-based organizations write off states like Kansas. They think we're too red, they think it's too hard, but we really have a lot of those national players at the table making sure that this campaign can raise and spend the amount of money that it needs to win, which I think is great and is a big change from what I think we sometimes see with national investments in states in the South and the Midwest. We are working on our field plan. We are planning on phone banking, canvassing, all of the tactics that you need to run a successful volunteer field program, and we are also hiring a field director. So we are staffing up to make sure that all of these organizations that are at the table and have expressed interest in talking to voters, hitting the doors, are doing so in a coordinated fashion that does not duplicate efforts or waste resources. So that's really important to us to have a really good field plan that includes, again, talking to the base and talking to swing voters and making sure that we get to our win number. We are also, we're doing paid media is a huge part of this. This is a statewide election, and, I am expecting that we are going to see higher levels of turnout than we normally would because of the campaigns that are going to be running on both sides of this ballot measure. So, we are planning for television, radio, digital ads, mail, all of those things, and, are ready to do whatever it takes to reach Kansans across the state. And, of course, our number one priority is always going to be winning on August 2nd.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. I'm glad you talked about the actual amendment because I'm an attorney, and the first time I read that amendment, I actually thought it said that we were getting, we'd have an opportunity to be able to, have abortion in cases of incest or rape or health of the mother. And it literally, like when I read that, I thought it meant that we were going to have that power. So it is so confusing, and they did that purposefully.
Yeah.
So,
Can we go back to that slide? Because I
yeah.
would love
Ian,
to
can
talk
you,
a little
can you
bit
go
more
back
about
to
that.
the
With the amendment language.
there? Oh, that was it.
Yeah. So I think, this is super confusing, right? Like this was written intentionally to confuse people. So the last clause there, but not limited to laws that account for circumstances of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest or circumstances of necessity to save the life of the mother. So that I feel like that including but not limited to is really important. What this basically says is that the legislature has the sole authority to make laws regarding abortion, and they can consider those circumstances, but nowhere does it say that they must consider those circumstances. Nowhere does it say that laws must include exceptions for rape or incest or when a pregnant person's life is in danger. That is not what that says. I firmly believe this was put in here to mislead people who are, there are I assume a lot of the people in this room are very like pro-choice and think that, anyone's reason for having an abortion is good enough for them, right? It's not, it's their decision. It is not my business. I think that is a lot of the, likely the position of many folks here. But yeah, there are a lot of people who are very, conflicted on this issue. And I think this is an attempt to make those folks comfortable with this kind of proposal because they're like, of course they think there should be exceptions, right? But there's nothing in here that guarantees that our state's laws would have any exceptions. And as we're seeing in other states across the country, even like in our neighboring state of Missouri, we are seeing more and more extreme abortion restrictions passed all the time, right? There was that bill in Missouri that, forbid abortions for ectopic pregnancies. There are, bills that allow, there was a bill in Idaho introduced that allows the family of the, father of a pregnancy that is conceived to sue the woman that is pregnant to not have an abortion, right? There are these laws that are becoming more and more extreme. The anti-choice movement sees the writing on the wall. They know that Roe's coming down, and things are only going to get worse from here. I would not trust the Kansas legislature to pass humane, sane abortion policy if this amendment passes, right? I don't think that they've given us any reason to assume that that will be the case.
I agree. All right, Ian, if you could go to the slide that says Plan D, and I will turn to Melinda. All right, Melinda, can you tell us about Plan D and how you plan to mobilize voters based upon data you've looked at? Like who should we be targeting? And I also want you to put in a props to your new PAC that you just formed.
Well, first I'll mention that both Kansans for Constitutional Freedom and Vote No Kansas both have an Act Blue account, and so you can just go to Act Blue and look up both of us and make a donation anytime. So last year there was a group of us here in Lawrence that spent time texting all over the 2nd Congressional District. We didn't do Shawnee County because they're a really big county. And so we contacted voters that are registered Democrats and registered as unaffiliated voters that voted in 2018 and or 2020 because those are likely possible voters for this year, right? The even year voters. And what we found was about half of the unaffiliated voters did support the right to an abortion or, support the right to abortion access. And the vast majority of Democrats did. One of the things that tells us is that unaffiliated voters are very tricky to organize, and we'll talk more about that today. Over the last few weeks, did anybody else attend Washington Days? I know Marcy was there, and Christina, and a few other folks. What I have found over the last few months is that Douglas County and Johnson County have a very well-organized Democratic Party, and the rest of the state does not. Okay, there's 103 counties here in Kansas that vastly do not have precinct committee people. There are many counties here in the state that have no party leadership in the county whatsoever. And so some of the things that we talk about in Plan D, and I use the term Plan D because Plan A should be your primary choice of contraception. There's Plan B if that doesn't work out. Plan C is internet abortion pill access. We are at Plan D, and unfortunately, Kansans are preparing for Plan E, which is evacuate the state, right? Seriously, they're actually getting people CDL, commercial driver's licenses, so that we can legally transport people all the way to Denver or all the way to Chicago to access an abortion. If we fail in August, that is what we are looking at. And one of the things that make me most angry about this abortion ban here in Kansas is that really who it affects is poor people. It's just poor people, right? It's gonna hurt, but I can come up with 10 grand, I can make it to Denver, I can get it, you know? And over half of abortions are now done with medication only. Young people are smart. Y'all know how to use the internet. You guys understand telehealth. You're gonna be able to access an abortion in that first trimester. So really, we are talking about abortion procedures often for children that already have names, and something is going terribly wrong. And I see that as a midwife all the time. And so this ban really only affects people that have a medical situation and no money. Okay? So that's who we're really trying to protect here. That and all of our friends in Texas, I'm glad you mentioned Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri residents come here for care because they don't have access to it in other places. People have come up all the way from Louisiana to Kansas to access reproductive care here. We have to win this, guys. And there's a lot of work to do, right? I'm not gonna soft sugarcoat it. There's 136 days left until this vote. We have to motivate 300,000 people between now and August 2nd. That is a lot. So part of Plan D is rebuilding Democratic Party infrastructure, right? We are actually the third smallest voter group in the state. Republicans have a little under 900,000 registered Republicans. I don't know how many of them are really going to show up, right? The win number is a little bouncy because we don't know how many Republicans believe that elections are now a fraudulent waste of time. That'll be interesting. I've noticed that Derek Schmidt and Scott Schwab have publicly walked back from some of that election talk lately. They've started to assure everyone that Kansans do actually have free and fair elections. We still don't know if there are going to be increased voter restrictions. So our deadline to register people to vote might actually change between now and July. We're not sure yet. One of the biggest things that we need to do in our party, though, I'm so glad some of the PCPs are here today, and we've been contacting them lately here in Douglas County to try to get folks ready to do some door-to-door canvassing in your precinct. We have 76 or so, is that right, Bruce, precincts here in Douglas County. And I really believe that Douglas County, we're going to do our own thing here, and we will turn out our voters. But I want you all to be aware that there are many counties that have completely orphan precincts. And so if anyone would like to adopt a precinct to organize the Democrats and unaffiliated folks there, that's also available as a volunteer opportunity. So if walking and door knocking, going door to door is not something that you can do, there's definitely donations that you can make, and there's also some other voter outreach projects that we can do precinct by precinct to try to rebuild parts of our party.
Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Or the next one? How about that one that you like, with the dual? Ian, can
Yeah.
you go one more?
Next.
That one?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that?
I have to look at it.
It's the 2018 and 2020.
So up at the top, you can see 2018 top left, and in the red is about a quarter of all registered voters actually participated in the 2018 primary election. Voter turnout was about 27%. In the bottom left, you see 2020 primary election turnout, where roughly 35% of the electorate took part in the August election. So generally, when it's not a presidential year, you generally see what it looks like at the top left, where you only have about a quarter of folks actually participating. What we need to do this year is have presidential level turnout in a non-presidential year, and it is quite a challenge. I'm not going to use the word primary anymore. I'm just saying August election, because if you're talking to an unaffiliated voter that has never participated in a primary, they may not understand what I'm talking about. So I'm just using the term August election and November election.
Cool. I think there's just one more if you'll go in, and I just had put that
Thank
up.
you.
Yeah.
So here after spring break, we have some projects here in town where we're going to start registering students. Do you have more thoughts on that later? Are you going to talk about that? Oh, okay. I'll stay away from the student part then. It's really important that everyone check your registration online and make sure that your address is up to date and things like that to make sure that you are going to get the correct ballot. I think that one of the things here in Douglas County that we did, do you remember 2020? I know it was a long time ago because of the pandemic, but here in Douglas County in 2020, everybody ran as a Democrat, and our elections were pretty much finalized by the outcome of the primary. And it was so competitive because we had competitive races here. We turned out more ballots than Shawnee County, even though Shawnee County outnumbers us by 60, 70,000 people. Douglas County turned in 3,000 more ballots than they did, right? And that's from those competitive races. And we still don't know what's going to happen with the House maps. We won't know until a few days before filing deadlines, probably. But I hope if you are watching this and thinking about running for a House seat, think about it. Really, really think about it. If we are going to have a place here in Douglas County where one of our 4 incumbents aren't living, right? Like there is going to end up being a 5th House district in Douglas County. So we're going to need a couple of people to turn out for that and run so that they can come to the legislature and support the things that Boog and Christina and Mike and Barbara do for us. One of the craziest things about 2020, I felt like, was I didn't realize how much support, it's like sometimes emotional support, voters kind of need to get their ballot in. And that was part of chasing down those mail-in ballots and get out the vote effort. So often people requested their ballot, they filled it out, they signed the back of the special envelope, they just didn't know where the drop box was, or they didn't realize when the deadline was. And so reaching out to people and really approaching it as a supportive effort, that you are supporting people and accessing their voter rights, I think had a lot to do with our 2020 turnout. And because we're dealing with all of the redistricting, we are going to have special challenges. There are going to be last-minute poll location changes. There are going to be districts that we do not even know about until late May. And the filing deadline is June 1st, right?
I think so.
Yeah, June 1st at noon, right? Yeah, and then the last thing I always like to mention too, that targeted approaches those last few weeks in an election are really important. I don't think it's a good use of anybody's time to just sit there and use an auto dialer and randomly call people that may or may not have already voted early and things like that. I'm just going to keep encouraging everybody that does voter outreach to make sure that you are targeting a specific population, targeting your message that is special to them so that it resonates and it will be effective. Because as Rachel mentioned, we do all have limited resources. We each have limited time as volunteers and things like that. And so it's important that we be really thoughtful as we work through our field plans. KDP released their field plan for the year, and it's been really helpful. So making sure that we have very targeted approaches so that we all use our time and energy wisely.
Thank you. Ian, next slide, please. If you'll pass that to Alina. Alina, so Alina, you are a young voter, a KU student. Why is defeating the anti-abortion amendment so important to you? And kind of as a corollary to that, like when you mention this to your friends who might not be politically active or even know, like, what's their response when you tell them, like, they're trying to ban abortions in all circumstances in Kansas?
Right. So like as you mentioned, I'm a sophomore at the University of Kansas right now, but I've lived in Lawrence since like I was around 12, so I consider myself kind of a townie. I work at Lawrence High School. I volunteer at the Dole Center of Politics. I've had so many experiences here that I'm so grateful for. One of those experiences being I was pregnant in high school, and we're at an abortion conference, and Junior's not at home with a nanny, so I think you know what choice was made there. But even in that situation, I had community support. I had like the friends that I made here in this town. I had like Amii, and I had the people at Planned Parenthood. And because of all the support that I received, I feel like I have a personal obligation to give back to the community that gave so much to me. Like just talking about like the issue of abortion, having those conversations, because what I do mostly is try and talk to other young people like around my age, other students, some of my coworkers, having those conversations, because when people think about like your civic duty, I guess a lot of our minds just immediately go to like voting in a presidential election, or if someone's just not as involved in politics, they're just immediately turned off from the idea entirely. But what a lot of us forget is that civic duty, like, that can happen at the local and even personal levels. So just having those conversations, what those look like, honestly, is just a casual conversation, destigmatizing the issue of abortion and turning it from like this hot topic that people are always dancing around and just making it another topic for conversation, destigmatizes the issue of abortion not only in like the minds of the peers that I'm talking to, but in mine as well. I know that these conversations work because a year ago today, I probably could not be up here talking about this, but being here now and like being in a safe space, I know that they have real world effects and they do cause real world change. And so yeah, I just want to give back to the community.
Awesome. There is hope. Thank you, Alina, and thanks for sharing that personal story. So Rachel, Ian, if you would go to the next slide, please. Rachel, can you give us some messaging tools and language so we can talk to our friends and our family and our neighbors about abortion and what, just help us how we start the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Really, can we give her another round of applause, please? That was really, like, it is. Abortion is a normal thing, and it is a part of so many people's lives, and we don't talk about it. And there's nothing shameful or wrong about having an abortion. And I just really appreciate you sharing that, because I know it takes bravery, even though you know it's okay, and you know that you did what you had to do, what was right for you. Like, I know that's still hard to talk about, especially in front of a big audience. So thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our messaging, because as was mentioned, it can be a sticky topic for people to talk about. I think, the most important thing is that, effective messaging is consistent and clear. We do need to be flexible because, again, we're going to be talking to base voters and to more swingy voters, so we need to be flexible in how we're talking to groups, as is like a fundamental organizing principle. We have to meet people where they are. So the way we talk to our base and folks we're trying to turn out may be a little different than how we talk to a swing audience, but really at the end of the day, the messages don't change that much. It needs to be simple and repeated, so make the biggest impact by creating a concise message. And whenever you can, you should always try to include an ask. If you are having these conversations out in the community, we need to ask people, okay, well, you're interested, will you volunteer? Will you donate to the campaign? Whatever your ask is at that moment, will you register to vote? Will you go with me when, we go vote on August 2nd? Including an ask is always good. So I'll take the next slide. So one of the most effective messages for people who either are supportive of abortion rights and access, or for those who are somewhere in the middle, is really talking about government interference and government overreach into personal decision making. So, one of the messages we lead with a lot is that we know that all pregnant Kansans deserve the right to make their own decisions about abortion, free of government interference and overreach. If this amendment passes, these decisions will no longer be made by patients facing complex and unique situations. They will be made by politicians in Topeka. If we can't all agree on what the decision should be, we should definitely be able to agree on who is making it, right? Our state legislature should not be getting involved in people's personal medical decisions. Those decisions need to be left to pregnant people and their families and whoever they choose to involve in that choice. I'll take the next slide. I think it's really important to make sure that to ensure that people understand the stakes and what is the actual impact of this amendment. So if this passes, politicians in Topeka will move quickly to ban abortion outright. We have no reason to believe this is not the case. This is going to harm women all across the state of Kansas, but we know that it's going to particularly hurt already underserved communities. So just making it very clear that this is the precursor and the first step to a total ban on abortion, which is a policy that very, very few Kansans are remotely comfortable with. And then I'll take the next slide. This is one that sometimes can be challenging for, I think, folks that are very supportive of reproductive rights to talk about, but it's really important to remind people that this amendment is unnecessary and that abortion is already heavily regulated in Kansas. This proposal is a solution in search of a problem. Abortion is already heavily regulated in Kansas. What this really does is give politicians the power to ban abortion in all instances for any reason. It even has the power to eliminate exceptions for rape, incest, and when a woman's health is at risk. So these are important things to remember. It can be, this is more of an attempt to, I think, counter some messaging from our opposition that wants to create this caricature of this future Kansas where, they love to say, we'll allow abortion up until the moment of birth, right? That's not a thing that happens, right? I think that the folks pushing this amendment have tried to take what they may consider to be a more moderate tact, but they're having a really hard time being disciplined in doing that. So I think it's really important that as much as we need to, continue to affirm our values of bodily autonomy, individual rights and liberty, making sure that, women, non-binary people, trans men have access to healthcare options, we also need to occasionally just remind people that aren't as informed as us, that aren't as, so deeply entrenched in our camp, that this isn't necessary. Abortion is already regulated. Abortion is a medical procedure, and medical procedures are regulated. There's a lot of stuff you need to do to be a doctor, including a doctor that provides abortion, right? This is not necessary and doesn't really address any actual material need in the state of Kansas. I'll take the next slide. So this is really the core message, the short and sweet of it, is personal health decisions, including decisions about abortion, should be left to a woman, her doctor, and her loved ones, not politicians in Topeka. That is something we should all be able to agree on. And I'll take the next slide. What you can do today, because I'm going to end with my ask, I'm going to include that. Register to vote. Make sure you are registered to vote. ksvotes.org is a good source to do that. Everybody here has told you to get registered to vote. My guess is you probably already are registered to vote. So what you need to do is find somebody that isn't and make sure that they get registered. Or somebody that you know that may be interested in this issue in particular, and make sure that they're aware that this will be on the ballot on August 2nd and that they need to show up, check their registration, etc. You can also sign up for KCF. So we are working on building our email list. We are working on raising money. We are really seeking volunteers to help us execute on all of our volunteer field programs. We are out in the community doing message trainings, doing speaking engagements like this to make sure that folks who are really invested in protecting abortion rights in this state are informed about what's going on. So I will be out in the lobby, and I have some sign-up sheets if you want to make sure you get on our email list, if you would like to volunteer, if you want to reserve a yard sign, which we'll have at some point, I promise. I will be outside with some sign-up sheets if you want to stop by. And then you can also donate. You can give at kansansforfreedom.com, and you can also sign up there to get on our email list as well. So if that's easier than mulling about in the lobby, you are welcome to do that as well. But those are my asks at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thank you,
Sure.
Rachel. And thank you for giving us some language and some messaging that we can take to others. So if you will pass the mic down to Alina. Alina, I had mentioned that you kind of tried to start a social media campaign the day that I told you about the amendment. And I know you've done, and next slide, sorry, Ian. I know you're working on some stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been working on as far as social media, and what has been your experience with, what have you learned about messaging to young voters?
Right, just so we can have some context, I don't know if y'all remember last year, like House Bill 2183, 2332, and these were just like a bunch of provisions that were put in place specifically trying to restrict young people from voting, specifically for situations like this where we need that young vote, and that young vote has the impact and can create the effect that we need. These are clear acts of voter suppression targeting young people. And so the way that me and my partner for this community project saw it was that, like, okay, fine, like the Kansans, like for life, can have like their church service and their territory can be there, but we know that young people's territory is going to be on social media, and that's kind of where my generation's forte lies. So we are developing infographics. My partner Izzy's a graphic design major. These are just like ideas for like aesthetics, because what do we know about like young people on social media? They like it palatable and they like it aesthetic. So I don't know much about that stuff. Izzy couldn't be with us today, but she's smart and she knows what she's doing, clearly, like, because these are so pretty. But I'm focusing on more of like the communications aspect of that. So we have people in our towns and in our communities that care about issues like these. They just don't have access to the information about it. And so what we're doing with these infographics is we're not just launching them into the webosphere and hoping that they land on someone who can care about it. We're specifically pointing out people that have like established followings and bases on social media, community leaders, local businesses, I don't know if you guys, if you're a local, you know the Kansas police scanner, like people that have these established followings of people that are going to be like-minded and are going to care about this stuff. Because social media, like with the technology that we have right now, we have the ability to reach audiences faster and with wider range than ever. And right now, we need that given our timeline, especially. And messaging at young voters, like, from experience, it's social media, and social media is the way to go with that. So if y'all are on Twitter or Instagram or anything like that, you'll probably see some stuff from us coming soon. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for doing all of that. Melinda, Ian, please slide. You had mentioned unaffiliated voters and the special challenges. Remember, this is a proposed constitutional amendment, so you don't have to be a registered Democrat or Republican to vote on the amendment, which is most unaffiliateds are not used to voting in the primary, so, or I should say the August elections. I'm going to start changing my terminology. So talk to us a little bit more about those challenges.
Sure. I just wanted to mention too real quick, there are about 300,000 adults in Kansas that are not registered to vote. There are going to be a few people that may not be eligible to register, but there's still a couple 100,000 folks out there that we need to get to, right? There's a lot of opportunity here. The unaffiliated voters, I think, are really interesting because when we've talked to them, especially in Southeast Kansas, they are either pretty progressive or liberal or left or not. And you just don't know which way it's going to go. And so I think that, when you have fresh volunteers, sending them to knock on doors or text bank or do some phone calls to your high turnout Democrats that are probably going to be supportive and maybe even do donations, those are great for new volunteers. Your more seasoned volunteers, that's who you need to put on the unaffiliated voters. You do have to be able to code switch back and forth pretty quickly. There are a ton of people in this state who do not have a concept of bodily autonomy, right? Like for a lot of folks, your body belongs to your spouse or to God. And so when you talk about bodily autonomy, some people do not understand what we're talking about, which is one of the reasons why I love the too much government messaging. That is actually going to work in a lot of the state. I mean, here in town, yeah, I would love a reproductive justice bumper sticker, yard sign, but those words don't mean anything to some people. And so that's why that messaging that Rachel's working on is so critical. In the last couple of months, the number of registered Republicans in the state actually started to go down, and the Democrats have continued to go down for months and months, several hundred every month, but unaffiliateds are on their way up. I don't know if that's a trend that is going to continue. I know that there are really progressive folks that are sometimes frustrated with Democratic Party stuff. Maybe that's at the top at the national level instead of local, and that some of our Democrat friends are hiding in the unaffiliated groups. Also because in some communities, people don't always feel comfortable letting others know that they are a registered Democrat or that they vote Democratic. I mean, that's sad to me, but at the same time, I trust people to know what is safe for them to out themselves about, right? And so I'm trying to develop materials that are comfortable for folks in rural communities, and materials that might be comfortable for people in that unaffiliated group. Yeah, they probably vote for Democrats every November, but this time we're asking them to participate in the August election, which is a new thing for them.
Next slide, please, Ian. So, Melinda, if you will. No, you're fine. So, final question for you. Are there any other proposed constitutional amendments that might be on the ballot? Because the whole, vote no Kansas, like it might be confusing. So what do you know about that?
That was so funny because in January, when Jason Probst and a couple other Democrats in the State House said they would like to have a constitutional amendment in August about medical marijuana, Ty Masterson said there just wasn't enough time to add something else to the August ballot. And now, a few months later, he has found the time to try to add additional amendments to change the Constitution. The one I am most concerned about is he wants to change the way that our Kansas Supreme Court justices are installed, and to get away from our good judicial processes that we have. It would further concentrate his power specifically. I think that is very autocratic. And as we look on the world stage, I think that is dangerous and concerning. I think that we have an excellent Kansas Supreme Court. That is how we got the right to bodily autonomy in 2019. In the birth world, we were really excited to be told we had bodily autonomy because it does not always feel like that, right, as a woman going through life. So the other amendment would affect the balance of the three separate branches of government here in the state, and would change the way that our Supreme Court justices are installed. And I'm very concerned about that.
So do you know when we will know if those amendments will be on the ballot? Is that the June 1st kind of
I think it's going to be last minute. I think we will not know until right before ballot printing time.
Okay, thank you. Awesome.
Yep, Marcy might know more. Where is it at, Marcy?
Marcy.
We will know, and my understanding or memory is that the constitutional amendments about the elections are on the November.
Ty Masterson wants the judge one on the August ballot because it is tied to the abortion movement. He admitted publicly in an interview that was printed in a newspaper that he said, yes, this is a response.
Great.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy.
Yeah, thank you,
We,
Senator
we look
Francis.
forward from your reports from the floor when that's happening. You let us all know.
Yes, and thank you for all of your work, Senator Francisco, on everything. As Pat mentioned, you do like quadruple duty. All right, next slide, please.
Let me mention another or two other things that have come up. Jamie Shu is going to be issuing new cards for every voter in Douglas County because of the redistricting. So that should come out, and that's going to be helpful. So when you say there's going to be confusion about redistricting, at least there will be that one message from our county clerk. And the only other thing that's really disturbed me is when you say this is, bodily autonomy, I think is a new name. But this right existed in our Constitution. The Supreme Court found that it existed, and this idea that the opponents or the proponents of this are saying this is a newfound right. No, this is the right that the Kansans who established our state wanted for everyone.
Thank you. Hear, hear. All right. Well, I would like to first off thank our panelists today. You're done. You're all off the hook. And so, don't despair. We can do this. And so, what you want to do is talk to folks about this anti-abortion amendment, get them informed, register to vote, and get others registered to vote if you're already registered. So, voter registration, at least the date as of now, the deadline to register to vote is July 12th. Early voting begins July 13th. And request a mail-in ballot. It's really makes voting so much easier. And then vote no on August 2nd. You can volunteer for one of these worthy organizations or give them some money. I'm sure that they would love to take a check from you. And then finally, next slide, please, Ian. We are going to, if you enjoyed Rachel's presentation on messaging and message training, we're going to actually do like a deeper dive message training on April 13th at our new headquarters, and from 6 to 7:30. And we've asked Leslie Bush from Planned Parenthood, who's actually put on this actual training. Alina and I went to this training a few weeks ago, and it's what Rachel talked about, but in a deeper dive. So if you want to, and actually like practicing and doing some role playing, so we wanted to make that available. We'd love to see you at our new headquarters, and I'm sure we'll get this out on an announcement, but just want to let you know there is some future training that you can in experience to help get us across the finish line in August. So I think the vice chair of the Douglas County Dems, last slide, Ian, please. Bruce Roberts, is going to talk about getting out the vote. And then I think when Bruce is finished, we are finished, right?
Yeah.
Pat?
I'll just sort of say goodbye to people, and we're also going to switch the questions.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. There's no passing the hat today. There's a reason. Yeah. Exactly.
It's about 5 slides back. Yeah, Rachel, it's the summary statement, I think, isn't it? Thank you very much, Amy. I'll only take about 3 minutes here. Thank you all for creating our call to action. You've done a great job today. Now it's our job individually. Each of our jobs is to now do something with this call to action. First and foremost, we need to work to defeat the amendment. That's our priority, and it's actually, in my judgment, wonderful in a sense for an August election, because now we have something that will unite a lot of people to do this. But you can add to this, reject voter suppression, right? Let's vote to show them that we don't like that. You can add to this, reject gerrymandering. We don't like that either, right? Add to this, fight for our democracy. It's been around now, a pretty hot topic for 2 years. Remember January 6th. As far as I'm concerned, these are all additional reasons to motivate us to motivate other voters. So let's get fired up and do that. Our steering committee for GOTV, Get Out the Vote, just met last Tuesday. So we're now underway. We're getting organized. We have groups that are going to focus on the components of how you do GOTV, including training, canvassing, contacting voters, et cetera. So that's really good that we have that underway. I think we just need to remind ourselves that August is important, but we also want to vote in November, right? So we have some wonderful candidates for office that we want to re-elect or elect. So keep those before you. Register to vote at ksvotes.org, and I'm working with them to find out when can I request an advance ballot on ksvotes.org. Finally, I want to thank the 5 or so people who signed up today in the lobby to volunteer. I encouraged each of those that I was able to speak with, please go out and ask 3 more people to do this, and ask them to ask 3 more people. Let's make it exponential and get the 400 to 500 volunteers we need to do this, right? Finally, we plan to have our volunteers knock on a minimum of 30 doors, but we hope they'll do more. But we feel that might be an invitation that a lot of people could say, I think I could do that. We want the volunteers to also help recruit other volunteers to do that, and a host of other activities and support functions that we need in the party. We want you to remind your families and your friends, and since this is a statewide August election, right, don't stop with your friends in Lawrence. If you have family that live in Wichita, get them involved. If they live in Norton, get them involved. I even encouraged a new volunteer this morning. She said, I have a lot of Democrat friends, but most of them are in Colorado. I said, they can work our virtual phone banks if they'd like to. Anyway, spread the way every way possible. We think we will begin canvassing in May, and then likely another cycle in June. Certainly then in the fall, in September and October. We're still formulating the specific calendar for that. But if you've signed up to volunteer, you will start getting information about those specific plans and what we want you to do. And we thank you for volunteering. Thank you.
Well, I think we all learned a little bit today. We are kind of running out of time, and so we think some of you have questions, and I'm going to end with an ask. Our panelists and our Douglas County Dems folks, we will be out in the lobby. Hope you will bring your questions out there. Hope you will sign up to volunteer. And thank you all. Have a good weekend. But this is the call to action. The time is now. Thank you. See you in the lobby.